All right, folks. Hi. We are in the stars section right now, and in the next section after this is the historical astronomy section. So that's the part that talks about uh, astronomy in the past, how the science of astronomy started, those early astronomers, how they discovered what they discovered. Um, and so this topic is sort of right in between those two topics, the star stuff and the historical astronomy stuff. So I figured out what the heck we'll do a quick video on constellations. They're pretty fun to look at, pretty fun to talk about. So if you don't know, a constellation is just a group of stars. Now these stars are not like actually literally connected in any way. It's just a group of stars that are typically in roughly the same spots, and those ancient historical peoples have looked up into the night sky and they saw, this group of six stars are in the same spot up in the sky basically every night. They show up again every winter, and so I recognize that as this particular constellation. Um, in today's day and age, we're able to follow and track where each of these constellations sort of move as a unit through the night sky as the different days progress, because of course the Earth is spinning, and the location of these stars are not always exactly the same spot, but we're able to track where they're moving as time goes on. Because all of these stars are part of the Milky Way galaxy, this one here, uh, over a long enough period of time, these stars are going to slightly move their position. So somebody who looked up at a constellation today is not going to be looking at exactly the same positioning. Those stars in that constellation are not in exactly the same spot as they were, 5,000 years ago. Perhaps when some of these really ancient peoples were looking up into the night sky and seeing these things. But the basic shape is still there. Um, Obviously, like I said, these stars aren't actually connected. They're not literally connected with one another. It's just individual stars. Some they might be close together. Some of them may be way, way far away from each other. Some of them might be a lot closer than others. So we might have a constellation where when we look up into the night sky, it's two specks that are right next to each other. But in reality, one of those specks is way up here, the other one's way back here, right? But from our perspective, they look like they're right next to each other. So are they connected? No. Short answer, no, they're not. But it's fun to look at and talk about. Constellations are pretty famous for their mythology. A lot of these constellations, when they were first discovered, where did I just go? Hey, come back. Here I am. Sorry. A lot of these constellations started hundreds and thousands of years ago. And so a lot of the stories that came about from these constellations are like ancient Greek stories, ancient Roman stories, where um, there's a story of some great powerful figure who's done some heroic deed and now has earned the honor of being placed up in the night sky forever. We'll talk about one of those examples, but here's a map of the constellations. There are 88 of them that have official names, and they show up frequently enough that we consider it to be a constellation. And you might recognize some of these names, especially the zodiac. Those are the ones that sort of follow right along this middle belt. Let's see if I can find some. There's Libra. Maybe you've heard of Libra. What else do we have? There's Gemini. There's another one. Do I recognize any other? There's Aquarius down here. So you might have heard of a couple of these. Uh, there's a pretty famous branch of science that focuses on studying these zodiacs. They People typically associate your the time of your birth with matching up with one of these astrological signs. In reality, they don't actually affect your life in any way. But it's fun to look at and think about all the different effects that it might have. In actuality, they do not affect your life in any way. So let's talk about one of these examples. So, like I said, constellations, they usually had some great meaning. It represented some big historical event of some god or some great figure of some important uh, person in history, and so they've earned the right to be placed up into the night sky. Like Orion here. Maybe you've seen this constellation Orion. This is only part of the constellation. Sometimes you can see some other bits. Um, let's see if I can find it here. All right, so this is a website that just shows. Where am I going to be here? Let's be down here. There's a website that shows what the night sky is going to look like at different times for your night. So I'm recording this on October 20th, 2022, and it has my location, so it knows, hey, if I go out at nights tonight and I look in this particular direction, right now it's facing southwest, and I look in this particular direction, I should be able to see this constellation at this time, this constellation's over here at this time, and so on and so forth. So let's look. I think Orion will be over here in the east. Let's move forward. Boop, 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 boop. Hey, there he is. So at about 12:30 a.m. early tomorrow morning, if I go out of my house and I look east, that's that way from me, I should be able to see Orion. Now, Orion is made up of a couple of different stars. It's very famous for having this group of three here called Orion's Belt. He's supposed to be a hunter. That's the old Greek story that he's a hunter, and he's in battle. He's beginning a battle against Taurus, the bull constellation, right in front of him here. So you can see his sort of bow and arrow, and he's gonna really give it to that Taurus. Anyway, there's all kinds of different stories. I'll link oh no, I got rid of it. Shoot. Hang on. Constellations. Uh, uh, Here we go. This page, this Wikipedia page, has a list of every single constellation. There are, like I said, there are 88 of them. So each one of them has their own history, their own stories from different time periods. So maybe ancient Greeks saw this constellation and they named it this, and it had this story. And the ancient Egyptians saw the same constellation up there, and they gave it some other story. So it's fun to look at and think about. Ooh, if these people saw this in that night sky, and these people saw this, and they had this story and this story, are they similar stories? Are they totally different? It's a very interesting look at some of that historical astronomy, even though they didn't really understand what these things were and how they happened. They were still able to track, like, oh, this group of stars is in roughly the same spot in the night sky every night. Speaking of, let's look at perhaps the most famous of these constellations. If you asked somebody to name a constellation, I would venture to say there's a pretty good chance that they would name this guy right here. It's a part of a larger constellation called Ursa Major, but the astute amongst you will recognize this immediately as the Big Dipper. It's just a part of this larger constellation called Ursa Major, or Big Bear. But if you go out in the night sky, at least where I'm at, and look towards the north, this is usually very bright and very noticeable as far as constellation goes. It's usually pretty easy to see. And if you find that big shining, excuse me, shining star right there at the tip of the Big Dipper and go straight up, you should eventually run into the Little Dipper. The Little Dipper's always upside down. It looks like it's pouring. If you look at the handle here, it looks like it's pouring something down into the Big Dipper. And that big bright star right there at the very edge of Ursa Minor, or Small Bear, or the Little Dipper, you'll find Polaris, otherwise known as the North Star. And wouldn't you know it, it's right above North. Bam. So tonight, or some night when it's real dark out and there's not a lot of clouds, you can get somewhere where there's not a whole lot of lights around you. Look up in the night sky, see if you can recognize some of these different constellations. There are tons of crazy stories, mythologies, super fascinating with a lot of these. I will, like I said, leave a link to this page with all of these different constellations, like Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, and you can read all kinds of mythology. It's the same constellation, but there's 6, 8 different groups that all saw the same constellation and gave it some different story, different mythology that had to do with that that constellation. So it's interesting stuff. I highly encourage you look into some of them. Just choose some at random and see what you can find out about them. Anyway, that's it for that. Next time, we'll get a little bit more into how the science of astronomy started, who the real founders of astronomy were, what sort of important discoveries they made, and how they sort of laid the groundwork for the future of the science. So I will see you guys then. See ya.